Welcome to the channel as we start another story from the Creepy Tales playlist. In the darkness, stories take shape. Some are whispered from the shadows. Others echo from places you should never go. These are the echoes of the unknown. Tales of horror, suspense, and fear that lingers. Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones you can't explain. The ones you don't want to know exist. Let's begin. The forest fire had raged for days, a roaring, hungry inferno that swallowed the mountains in thick, choking smoke. Trees became blackened skeletons, their twisted branches clawing at the orange, smoke-choked sky. Firefighters battled the flames, their trucks carving thin, pale lines of defense against the chaos. But finally, the rain came, cold, heavy drops that sizzled against the burning wood. Steam rose in thick, ghostly plumes, the fire's fury reduced to a smoldering, smoky mist. Captain Morales stood at the edge of the charred forest, his breathing mask pulled away, his sweat-soaked face pale beneath the thick, ash-gray sky. "Spread out," he ordered, his voice a hoarse rasp. "Look for any hot spots. We don't need another flare-up." The firefighters fanned out, their boots crunching against the scorched earth. Smoke curled in thin, ghostly tendrils, rising from the blackened trunks. But then one of them shouted, his voice sharp. "Hey! Over here!" Morales turned, his boots sinking into the cold, wet ash. But as he pushed through the smoke, he froze. There, standing untouched in the middle of the charred wasteland, two brightly colored tents, perfectly intact. The grass beneath them was green and fresh, a small, untouched patch of life in a dead, black forest. The firefighters stood in stunned silence, their soot-streaked faces pale. The tents were pristine, vibrant red and blue, their fabric gently swaying in the faint breeze. The campsite was a small island of green, surrounded by a sea of blackened, smoldering trees. Captain Morales stepped forward, his gloved fingers brushing against the tent flap. It swung open easily. Inside, a sleeping bag lay neatly rolled out, a flashlight resting beside a pillow. The air smelled clean, fresh, like rain on grass. "Is this some kind of joke?" one of the firefighters whispered. But Morales's voice was tense. "Who would do this? In a wildfire?" The others spread out, searching the edge of the clearing. But there were no footprints in the ash, no tire tracks, no trail leading away. Just the untouched campsite, standing silently in the blackened forest. He radioed the base, his voice tight. "This is Unit 3, we've got an anomaly. I need a search team out here." But even as he spoke, a thick, heavy silence seemed to press against his ears. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. The search team arrived within the hour, rangers with their khaki uniforms streaked with ash, drones buzzing overhead, scanning the charred wasteland. The campsite stood exactly as they found it, tents upright, the grass green and damp beneath them. A portable cooler sat beside a camping chair, its lid slightly open. Captain Morales directed the searchers, his voice sharp. "Spread out. Check the trees. Check for footprints." But the rangers returned, shaking their heads. No tracks. No broken branches. No sign of struggle. One of them, a young woman named Anna, peered into the tents. Inside one, she found a teddy bear, small, worn, with a red ribbon around its neck. In the other, a stack of paperback novels, neatly arranged. A portable radio sat beside them, its batteries drained. "It's like they just walked away," Anna whispered. But Morales frowned. "Walked where?" He turned in a slow circle, his eyes scanning the charred, twisted trees. "This whole place should be ashes. So why is this here?" But the forest gave no answer. Only the thick, heavy mist pressed against the trees, twisting like pale smoke. As the sun began to sink behind the charred mountains, the searchers scoured the campsite. They listed the strange, untouched items: 2 tents, 3 camping chairs, a portable stove, a half-empty water jug, and the cooler with fresh ice, barely melted. But Anna found something else, leaning against a tree at the edge of the clearing. An antique mirror, its silver frame tarnished, the glass fogged and cold. She picked it up, wiping the mist away, her own reflection staring back, pale, wide-eyed. But then, just for an instant, she thought she saw something else, a faint, dark shadow twisting behind her. Her breath caught, and she set the mirror down quickly, her fingers shaking. "Anything?" Morales asked, his voice tense. "No, just more questions," she whispered. The searchers marked the campsite with yellow tape, fanning out through the twisted, blackened trees. But as they searched, a cold wind stirred the ashes, sending faint, ghostly wisps curling through the air. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of the dying light, a faint, rhythmic whisper seemed to drift through the trees. Night settled over the charred forest, the sky a thick, pale gray, the air sharp and cold. The searchers set up temporary lights, their beams pale and weak against the thickening mist. A fire was built, its orange glow a fragile island of warmth in the darkness. Captain Morales sat by the fire, his eyes never leaving the untouched campsite. "It doesn't make sense," he muttered, his voice a faint, tired rasp. But then Anna leaned closer, her voice a thin whisper. "Did you hear that?" The others paused, listening. Silence. But then, faint and distant, a slow, rhythmic whisper. It seemed to drift through the trees, too soft to understand, but there, pressing against the cold air. "It's just the wind, Morales whispered, trying to force a smile. But his own voice trembled. But the whisper seemed to return, faint, rhythmic, clawing at the edges of hearing. Anna's gaze drifted to the mirror, its fogged surface catching the pale, flickering light. Her fingers tightened around her flashlight, her pulse a faint, quick beat. But when she glanced at the mirror again, she thought she saw something, just for an instant. A dark, twisted shape writhing within the glass. The fire crackled weakly, its light dancing against the blackened trees. Anna sat closer to the flames, her fingers trembling around her flashlight. Her gaze kept drifting to the antique mirror, leaning against the tree, its fogged glass reflecting the pale, flickering light. "Anna, you okay?" Morales's voice was a faint, distant murmur. She forced a smile, but her eyes stayed on the mirror. "Yeah, just tired." But in truth, she couldn't shake it, the feeling that something was watching her. The whisper seemed louder now, a faint, rhythmic murmur pressing against her ears. Finally, she stood, stepping closer to the mirror. Her fingers brushed against the cold, tarnished silver frame. Her own reflection stared back, pale, wide-eyed, her hair wild in the wind. But just for an instant, she saw it, something else behind her. A faint, dark shape twisting, stretching, then melting into the fog of glass. Her breath caught. The mirror slipped from her grasp, thudding softly against the grass. The others looked up, but she forced a laugh. Just slipped. But her heart raced, her pulse a frantic beat. And the whisper never stopped. Sleep came in restless fits. The searchers lay in their sleeping bags, their faces pale in the dying firelight. Anna lay awake, her gaze fixed on the pale, glowing mist that curled through the trees. The whisper seemed to rise and fall, a faint, rhythmic hum pressing against her ears. But then she saw it, just beyond the edge of the firelight. A faint, dark shape shifting between the trees. Her breath caught, her fingers tightening around her flashlight. "Morales," she whispered, but his eyes were closed, his face pale and tense. The shape twisted, stretching like a shadow cast by nothing. Pale, thin limbs seemed to coil, then melt into the darkness. Anna's pulse raced. "Wake up," she whispered, louder now. But the others slept, their breathing faint, shallow. And then the shape was gone, swallowed by the mist. But the whisper remained, a slow, steady pulse pressing against her ears. Morning came pale and cold, the weak sunlight a thin, gray smear against the sky. Anna rubbed her eyes, her breath a faint mist against the cold air. But as she glanced around, her stomach twisted. One of the searchers, Eddie, was gone. His sleeping bag lay empty, his boots still neatly placed beside it. His flashlight rested against a nearby log, the beam dead. "Eddie?" Morales's voice was sharp, cracking with tension. The others spread out, calling his name, their voices swallowed by the cold, misty air. But there were no footprints. No broken branches. No trail. Anna's gaze drifted to the mirror, leaning against the tree. Its surface was fogged, a faint, pale glow twisting within the glass. Her fingers trembled as she stepped closer, but Morales grabbed her arm. "Leave it," he whispered, his voice a thin, desperate rasp. "We have to find Eddie." But the forest was silent, the mist thick and heavy. Only the faint, rhythmic whisper seemed to press against their ears. Desperate, the searchers left the untouched campsite behind, marking it with yellow tape, fanning out through the twisted, blackened forest. But as they searched, they noticed something new, strange symbols carved into the charred trees. The symbols were sharp, twisting spirals and jagged lines, fresh and deep, the bark still peeling. They climbed higher and higher, twisting up the trunks, disappearing into the mist-shrouded branches. "What is this?" one of the searchers whispered, his voice a thin, desperate rasp. "Someone's playing a sick joke," Morales muttered, but even he didn't believe it. His fingers traced one of the spirals, the wood cold beneath his gloves. Anna stepped back, her eyes wide. The whisper seemed louder here, a faint, rhythmic pulse pressing against her ears. The mist twisted between the trees, curling like pale smoke. "Did you hear that?" another searcher whispered. But they were all hearing it now, a slow, rhythmic hum that seemed to claw at the edges of hearing. The mist thickened, twisting around their legs, their flashlight beams growing pale and weak. Anna's pulse raced, her gaze flicking between the twisted, scorched trees. The whisper was constant now, a slow, distorted drone that seemed to press against her mind. But then a pale, orange glow appeared through the mist. Fire. A cold, ghostly flame twisting between the blackened branches. Morales shouted, waving his flashlight, but the fire didn't spread. It floated, twisting, writhing like a pale, spectral ribbon. "Get back!" Morales yelled, but the others stood frozen, staring at the twisting flame. It coiled, stretched, a faint, pale light that seemed to shiver against the darkness. And then Anna saw it, just for an instant. A face, twisted, dark, pressing through the pale flame. Empty eyes, a hollow mouth, then gone. The flame vanished, the mist swallowing them. The whisper was louder now, a thick, rhythmic drone pressing against their ears. Anna stumbled back, her flashlight beam shaking. "This isn't real, this isn't real," she whispered. But the darkness seemed to lean closer, the mist twisting like pale, ghostly fingers. Panic gripped the searchers. Their flashlights trembled, their beams swallowed by the thick, twisting mist. Anna's breath came in sharp, frantic gasps, her pulse a painful hammer in her chest. We have to go now," she cried. But Morales stood frozen, his eyes locked on the ground. "Wait, look!" His beam illuminated a trail of footprints, bare, twisted prints pressed deep into the ash. Those are Eddie's," whispered one of the searchers. But the prints didn't make sense. They twisted, circling, veering off sharply, and then stopped. No continuation. No broken branches. Just empty, blackened earth. The whisper was louder now, a slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed to press against their ears, clawing at the edge of hearing. "It doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense," Morales shouted, his voice cracking. But the mist thickened, curling around their legs, pressing against their faces like cold, damp fingers. Anna's flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering. And just beyond the mist, she thought she saw something, a faint, dark shape twisting, stretching, then melting into the fog. They stumbled back to the untouched campsite, desperate for the weak comfort of the familiar. The green grass was still soft beneath their boots, the tents untouched, the air fresh and cool. But the mirror leaned against the tree, its surface no longer fogged. Anna stared at it, her breath a faint, trembling gasp. The mirror seemed alive now, its glass swirling with faint, pale light, twisting like ghostly mist trapped beneath the surface. "Don't touch it!" Morales snapped, his voice sharp, but Anna couldn't look away. Her own reflection stared back, pale, wide-eyed, her hair wild, her skin damp with sweat. But something moved behind her reflection, a dark, twisted shape that coiled, stretched, then melted into the glass. The whisper was a thick, rhythmic hum now, pressing against her ears. She stepped back, her foot catching on a tent stake. She stumbled, the mirror falling, but it didn't shatter. It lay in the grass, its surface glowing, the pale, twisting light writhing within. Morales grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "We're leaving. Now." But even as he dragged her away, Anna's gaze stayed locked on the mirror, her heart pounding. The light within it twisted, shapes writhing, pressing against the glass. They ran, Morales shouting orders, the others stumbling through the mist, their flashlights cutting weak, pale beams. The whisper seemed to follow them, a slow, hungry drone that pulsed through the air. "Stay together! Don't look back!" Morales shouted. But his voice was faint, muffled by the thick, twisting fog. Anna's breath came in short, sharp gasps, her flashlight beam flickering. But then she heard it, a faint, desperate cry. "Morales!" She spun, her beams slicing through the mist. But he was gone. His voice seemed to echo, distant, fading. "Morales!" Another searcher screamed, stumbling back. But then he too was gone, his beams swallowed by the thick, swirling mist. Anna's legs buckled, her pulse a frantic beat. The whisper was a thick, distorted chorus now, pressing against her ears. Pale, twisted shapes seemed to shift just beyond the fog. She tried to run, her feet slipping against the damp ash. But the darkness seemed to press closer, the mist curling around her, the whisper a low, rhythmic moan. Anna's legs were weak, her breath a faint, desperate rasp. The mist twisted around her, cold and sharp, her flashlight beam pale and weak. But then the light flickered, stuttered, and went dark. "No, no, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. She clawed at her backpack, pulling out a spare flashlight. But the beam was pale, barely aglow. The whisper was a thick, rhythmic drone now, clawing at her mind. She turned, her light catching the edge of the campsite, the untouched tents still standing. But they seemed wrong, distorted, their edges twisting like shadows beneath water. And the mirror glowed, its surface a pale, ghostly light, twisting with dark shapes that seemed to press against the glass. The whisper rose, a thick, distorted moan. "Morales!" she screamed. But only the mist answered, thick and cold, pressing against her. The whisper seemed to claw at her ears, a slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed to crawl beneath her skin. The mirror's glow twisted, the pale, ghostly light pulsing. And just for an instant she saw them, faces, pale and twisted, pressing against the glass, then melting back into the fog. Morning came pale and gray, a faint mist clinging to the blackened forest. The search team's radios crackled with static, Captain Morales's voice a desperate rasp. "Base, this is Unit 3, we need backup, they're just gone." But when the rescue team arrived, the forest was silent. The air was sharp and cold, the ash thick beneath their boots. They followed the yellow tape, winding through the twisted, scorched trees. But the untouched campsite was gone. Only the green patch of grass remained, cold, fresh, a perfect circle surrounded by blackened earth. No tents. No chairs. No mirror. No sign of the searchers. They searched for hours, their voices calling, their flashlights cutting through the mist. But the forest was empty. The radio crackled faintly, static, garbled whispers. But when they turned back, they saw it, faint symbols carved into the trees, spirals and jagged lines twisting higher and higher, vanishing into the mist-shrouded canopy. And the mist thickened, curling around their legs. The whisper seemed to rise again, faint, rhythmic, pressing against their ears. But the forest was silent. Empty. As though they had never been there. Next time you're home all alone, and you hear those things that go bump in the night, sometimes they are best left alone.